right. Thank you so much, Sean. And thank you, Sean, for the Bible bag. And that was really great. And thank you for LaShonda for getting us ready for worship. And I want to welcome you all here this morning. Yes, you get to hear me today, but don't worry, Sean's right here. He'll pinch me if I start going too long. Um, but I want to start off by saying Happy Mother's Day. I want to say thank you so much, all you mothers out there, for all that you do. You're such a gift and such a blessing to everyone around you, not just your own children. And I hope today that you experience at least a fraction of that love and care and warmth that you give to everyone under your care, from your children and everyone around you. So thank you. And from Water's Edge to all those mothers, we love you. And from me to my mother, I love you, Mom. All right, so this morning we are in Deuteronomy chapter 3, verses 21 through 29. And in keeping with the Mother's Day, we want to talk about Mother Moses. So if your mother is anything like mine, she's always giving me these loving advices. And they come in lists sometimes, but she always gives them to me since I can remember to even now. As I'm so far away, she's always sending me these loving advice. And we are very grateful to your mothers. We might not show it at the time as you're giving these pieces of advice, but we are appreciative and grateful. And sometimes that advice list can run a little bit long, and sometimes it's even placed at the end of a phone call, but we still love it all the same. And in the same way, here in Deuteronomy, Moses, the mother of the Israelite boys, is giving his loving pieces of advice to them. Deuteronomy is Mother Moses' last bits of advice before his Israelite boys go off to the University of Canaan. And he knows, just like mothers know, he can't go with them to college. Mothers, you know, right? You can't go with your children to college. And Moses knows this very thing. So he says, all right, one last thing. Before you go off to college, to the land of Canaan campus, here's my loving piece of advice. And he gives remember to's advice, right? And you've heard from your mother, right? Remember to eat your vegetables. Remember to don't talk to strangers. Remember, wash behind your ears. Remember to be respectful. And in the verses today, Moses would say to his Israelite boys, remember to not fear. Why? Because fear is a liar. And in the past lessons, Sean has taught us about the other remember to's advice that Moses gives. Remember to not doubt God's love. Remember that God was angry, yet gracious. But also remember that no enemy will be enough with God on your side. And this morning, we're going to dive right in to chapter 3. And Moses' advice to his Israelite boys, remember, do not fear. So chapter 3, verse 21 is right after Israelites' battle against King Og of Bashan. And if you remember, Sean, he taught us that King Og and his people were giants in the land, the last remaining, in fact. But as we learned, with God, size and strength has no match between God and against God and his almighty power. And as we learn that also with Goliath, size and strength have nothing against God. So the Israelites have, after 38 years of wandering, 38 years of getting it wrong, have finally gotten it right and taken that first step of faith into battle. And God has delivered their enemies into their hands because they began to possess the land. God already gave them victory. He says, all you have to do is begin to possess. Just take that first step of faith. And then after God gave them that victory, they then divide the land. That's the beginning of chapter 3 in Deuteronomy. And after this division of land among the Israelites, and there's a lot of land to divide, verses 21 through 29 are a dialogue, first between Moses and Joshua, and then it ends with the dialogue between Moses and God. And we want to talk about that dialogue. And I want us to see three things this morning. Number one, what fear got them, what fear will get you, and what faith gives us. And those points you'll see on the screen right here. So point number one, what fear got them, that is the Israelites. In verse 21, Moses and Joshua are talking, and it's finally time for Moses to pass the torch of leadership down to Joshua. And as any good leader does, he's encouraging, he's empowering, he's giving advice so that Joshua can grab hold of that torch with confidence and lead these people to the promised land. So Moses knows a couple of things. He knows that he won't be joining him because Moses is part of the old generation. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But Moses also tells Joshua and the new generation that he will be leading the people into the promised land. But it won't be without its battles. Yes, they just gained victory, 2 major battles won by God's hand. But going into the Jordan, there's going to be much battles to come. And they won't be any less aggressive or any less violent than the ones they just fought. So because of this, Moses encourages Joshua. He says, you have seen with your own eyes, this is verse 21, you've seen with your own eyes all that the Lord your God has done to these 2 kings. And the Lord will do the same to all the kingdoms over there where you're going. So don't be afraid. And he tags it with, do not fear. Because fear results in doubt and disobedience. That's kind of the equation of fear. But also because fear is a liar. And look what it got us. Look what it got them back then. In the very same battles. In their old generation and their old way of handling fear. They let fear take over when they're facing these same armies that they just beat, but some 38 years ago. And they said, we can't win this fight, so let's not fight. And then they got a little bit spanked by God for doubting, and then they got mad. Okay, fine, we'll fight this time. And they went without God, under their own power, and they lost miserably. Because they went without God, and Sean talked about that last week. That's one of the ways we try and handle fear, by getting angry and doing it through our own power. So the result of fear, this is what fear got them. The result was they had no promised land, no rest, no peace, no security, and no home. And in addition to that, back then, if you were a believing people, you had a God and you had a godly land. And this is how you found your identity. All your identity was wrapped in your God and your land. And here the Israelites are in the desert with nations around them. And they have a God, but no land. And how humiliating that must have been to hear all the nations say, whoa, you say you believe in this God, but you don't have a land to go with it? Maybe he's abandoned you, or maybe he's not strong enough to secure land for you. So not only are they losing battles, they have no rest or peace, but they're kind of humiliated because they don't have the land that they were promised. And also they're left to wander for 38 years. So that's what fear got them. They're filled with shame for doubting. They've lost the battle. They're wandering for 38 years. And they're humiliated. All because they've let fear stop them from taking the promised land. But now we're here. And this is the piece of advice Moses gives his apprentice. And if Moses were Master Yoda, he would say, fear, do not. Mm-hmm. Fear leads to doubt. Doubt leads to disobedience. And disobedience leads to wandering. So that's what it meant for them. What fear did to them, it made them lose everything. Which leads us to our second point, what fear will do to you. So let's sit here on this critical truth that fear is a liar. And we love that song, right? That song, Fear is a Liar. We love listening to it. And but what makes fear actually a liar? Because we have healthy fears, right? I fear the stove. I'm not going to touch it because it's going to burn me. That's a healthy fear. Same thing with coffee. We actually have signs on coffee telling us that it's hot. So we have a healthy fear. Don't pour it on me. It's going to burn. And then there's the fear of God, right? And the Bible would tell us that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. So at what point is fear a liar? What point is fear an actual liar? So first we need to understand where fear comes from. Fear comes from the evil one. And if you read John chapter 8, it says that when Satan lies, he's speaking his native tongue, and that he is the father of lies. So the fear comes from the evil one, and that's why we say fear is a liar. But also, we need to recognize fear as a liar when we come into battles or trials, tasks that the Lord has for us. So picture it this way. Here's you, here's God, and in the middle right here is a bridge. That's your battle. That's your trial or your task. And fear is an agent of the evil one to keep us from getting to God. We're over here in our old ways. Fear is in the middle, keeping us from God. But I want to talk about 3 specific things that fear keeps us from when we approach those battle bridges or those trial trenches. So fear keeps us from 3 things. Number 1, victory. Number 2, new pastures. And number 3, God's glory. So let's focus on the first one. Fear keeps us from victory. Now, whether you're a believer or not this morning, God is constantly placing opportunities in front of you. And they come in many forms. An opportunity to grow. Opportunity to drop to your knees, maybe for the first time for the non-believer. Or an opportunity to learn how much more work you actually have. And Celebrate Recovery, real quick, is a great place to discover these. You go in maybe for a specific addiction, right? And you take on that bridge. God gives you power and you fly through that. And you gain victory. And then you're like, yes, I'm finally free and I got no other problems. But then you notice, oh wow, there's a bridge over there. And a bridge after that, and after that. And that's a good thing, trust me. And that's what the Christian life's about. Going through these bridges or trials so that we can gain victory over all those things. So what does this mean for us? Well, for the one, how does fear keep us from victory? For the one who struggles with pornography, maybe you've tried everything. Maybe you've made promises to God or to your wife, but you keep failing. But you hear God's call. You hear God's call to bring you victory at long last. And you're ready to take that first step onto that bridge. But then fear says, you know what? No need to try again. There's no need. You're just going to fail again, like you always do. So don't take that step. Months pass and you develop a paralyzing fear of failure. Years pass and the lie has sunken in to your heart. And you start hurting the people you love, or the people you love start leaving. And thus, Satan's agent of fear has done his job, lied to you, and you have no hope and thus no victory. So that's how fear keeps us from victory. The next thing fear keeps us from is new pasture. What do I mean by that? So as Jesus, the great shepherd, he is constantly calling us to new pastures. We know that from Psalm 23, that famous verse. And it is true that in the moment that you declare Jesus as your Lord and Savior and go through baptism, you are saved, you are forgiven, you are gifted with the Holy Spirit. And it's amazing that Jesus is willing to meet us wherever we're at. But Jesus has no intention of leaving you in that state. Now begins a lifelong process of refining, of sanctification, of recovery, whatever you want to call it, to put off our old selves. He wants to take you to new pastures, to new ways of doing things that are pleasing to God. But as sheep, we are fragile, we are skittish, and we're constantly turning around and running away. But God is wanting to lead us to new pastures. And we might take that first step as sheep, trusting and obeying, but the bridge seems a little sketchy. Have you ever seen a bridge like that? You're like, I don't know about that. I'm not going to walk across that. And we tend to turn and run away back to our old selves, back to our old sin. So what does this mean for us? Well, for the one who struggles with the love of money, you might hear God's call to stewardship or to tithing or financial peace, and you think, it's about time that I give a little bit. And you might up your tithe some. It's time for me to sponsor a child, to save money, or to pay off debt. And maybe even sell that sports car and donate the money. Who knows? I'm ready for this call, Lord. Let's do this. And you start walking on that bridge. You take a couple of steps, and then fear says, what if the stock market crashes tomorrow? What if you get extremely sick and you just did away with all that cash? But you step anyway until the coronavirus hits. You didn't see that coming. No one saw that coming. You grip your money a little bit tighter. You say, okay, maybe this wasn't my cross to bear. We'll say that a lot. This just isn't my cross to bear. God wouldn't want me to go broke. So you take your money back. Maybe you withdraw your membership at church. You tuck tail and you run back to the comfort of your money because that's what you know. And therefore, fear has robbed you of new pastures, a new way of dealing with your money. And thus, Satan's agent of fear has done her job and kept you from a life secured by God instead of attempting to have money secure you. It's kept you from God providing that physical wealth as well as spiritual wealth. And it's kept you from financial peace and kept you from a development of a giving heart. Fear has kept you from new pastures. And then the last thing, fear keeps us from God's glory. So what do I mean by this? In James chapter 1, and this is a verse that a lot of Christians struggle with. It says, consider it a pure joy when you go through trials of many, many kinds. And it says, if you persevere through those trials, you develop spiritual maturity. But why should we consider it a pure joy? That's what I want to talk about. At the end of each trial, at the end of each bridge, God is revealing a little more about himself and about who you are at the end of the trial. And in that, we fall into a deeper love, a deeper level of intimacy with God. Because he's revealing things about himself that we had no idea were even there. And he holds us tight and he says, look at what I just brought you through. Look at these new ways of doing things. And look at me. Look at how strong I am. I carried you all this way. I secured that bridge. I secured you. Look at how amazing, good, and loving I am. And he unveils from our eyes the things we've never seen before about God. We've never known before about God. Fear keeps us from that next level of intimacy, where we learn more about the depth of God's love. But it also keeps us from another type of glory. We are also kept from the sharing of the glory of God. A glory of God is displayed when one of his sheep, by faith, goes across that bridge, experiences new pasture, experiences God's glory, and now it's his turn to tell the story. This is where testimonies come in. The testimonies give a sheep a chance to tell another sheep, look what God did for me. Look what God did. Look how good he is. And it causes that other sheep to say, wait, what? God did what? With you? No way. I got to find out for myself who this God is. So fear keeps us from those glories, experiencing God's glory. And through each bridge, he brings us from glory to glory to glory. And that simply means he's unveiling more truth about how great he is. And the more bridges we go through, the more glory of God we experience, we develop a craving, and we can't wait for the next bridge to come. That's why you consider it a pure joy to go through trials of many kinds. Why? You experience God in a way you've never thought possible. But also you have a chance to tell that story about God's glory to someone else. And that spreads his kingdom wide and far. And you know that saying, the grass is greener on the other side? We tend to think that that's a lie. But that's true when it comes to the trials of God. He brings us through to greener grasses, greener pasture. So what does this mean for us? Well, for the one who struggles with pride, maybe you've been humbled. Maybe you've lost your job. Maybe that you've lost 5 years of sobriety and you've turned back to your addiction. Maybe you've been forced to declare bankruptcy. In all these circumstances, you have lost years of devotion, years of cultivation, years of stewardship. But God is calling you to rebuild and recover. You're like, all right, God, I'll do this. And you walk that bridge, and you make it all the way to the end, and you're about to step into God's glory, into all the gifts that God has waiting for you. And then fear says, you know, what if you get no recognition for this? What if God just pulls the rug out from under you again? You fall on your face and everyone laughs. What about all that work you just did? You're not going to get any credit for that? And you panic and you say, you know, I've done a lot of growing here. I did a lot of work to get to where I'm at. I've pulled myself up by my own bootstraps. I just needed a push. I was weak, but not powerless. Now that I have that push, I don't need God anymore. You go back to your prideful self. And you have success for a couple months. And you say, you know, I didn't need God. I'm good now. But the thing that you miss out, you've never replaced those bad habits that got you to where you were 6 months ago. You've never replaced them with what God had for you at the end. In revealing his glory, he teaches us how to fend off those temptations or those bad habits. But you never learned any of that. So they come back, and they come back stronger. And you find yourself where you were 6 months ago. And Satan's agent of fear has done his job and kept you from reaching God's glory. New enlightenment, new revelation for your life by making you doubt God's true intention of restoring you. You steal the glory for yourself, and you find yourself back in your old dried up pastures of relapsed infested weeds. And you ask yourself, how did this happen again? And fear has got you once again. This is what fear will do. God's given us a bridge, a task, a trial, a battle to get us to the other side, to bring us to new pasture. But you've let fear wiggle its way in. Whether it was the beginning, the middle, or the end of that bridge, fear has elbowed its way in and caused you to doubt. Fear will cause you to doubt him. Fear will cause you to freeze in your journey. Fear will cause you to think of what other people might be thinking of your new self. You might lose some old friends because you're making your way to new pastures. Fear will cause you to miss your old self. That's what you know. That's what you're comfortable with. And fear will cause you to become angry with yourself or with the world because you're not experiencing freedom, you're not experiencing redemption or peace. And lastly, fear will cause you to miss out on all the wonders God has for your life. And it will cause you to miss out on that opportunity to share what God's done in your life with other people. So that's what fear will get you. It keeps you from victory, new pastures, and from God's glory. Which brings us to our last point, what faith gets us being the children of God. Going back to Moses and Joshua, Moses says, don't fear. Look what fear got them, and look what faith got you. And if fear resulted in doubt and disobedience, faith equals trust plus obedience. says to Joshua, you not only trusted that God was capable and willing to deliver you into victory, but you took that first step. You began to possess the land. And that's what faith got you, filled with confidence by stepping, victory in battle. You gained land, you gained livestock, you gained 60 fortified cities for yourself. And you gained one step closer to reaching the promised land and new pastures. And then he adds a little cherry on top after he says, do not fear, because look at what faith got you. He says, God himself will fight for you in the battles to come. If I'm Joshua, I'm excited. I'm ecstatic. I'm pumped up, ready to go on. God's going to fight for me? He just did this through our faith? That's crazy. I'm going to keep going to the promised land. And this is great for them. This is the end they had in mind. This is what I would want to hear if I was Joshua. But what faith does and what faith gives for us today is a little bit more than we could ever hope for. And I'm going to try and tie in the last dialogue between Moses and God. Now in Deuteronomy, Moses was himself the greatest mediator of divine words to God's people until Jesus, of course. But Moses, here's the point I want to make. Moses, being part of the old generation, will not have access to the promised land. Therefore, he must stop here. He must give his farewell address. He must pass on the torch to Joshua because he cannot pass to the Jordan, to the promised land. And he can't. He can't do this. Even though he remained faithful, his curse, Moses' curse, is that he's part of the old generation. He's part of the old generation. And the old cannot take possession of what belongs to the new. Let me say that again. The old cannot take possession of what belongs to the new. So he can't cross because he's part of the old generation. And the old generation handled their fear with doubt and disobedience. And Moses cries out to God in verse 24. He says, Lord, you have begun to show your servant your greatness, your strong hand, with your glory. He says, let me go over and see that good land. What a humble prayer. Just let me go see it. And God's response to Moses seems harsh. He says, no. He says Joshua and the new generation, they're going to go ahead. They're going to see the land, but you will not. They are a generation of faith. You're a generation of doubt and disobedience. They will go, and you will not. And that seems so harsh. And the end for Moses and his journey seems a little bit gloomy. But the beauty of faith for us today, it starts a little bit gloomy. The fact is, there's a pasture. We know as Christians, there was a pasture that we could not get into. But by faith, there was one who made it possible to get to. There was one who was always living in his new self because he had no sin to put off, no old self to put off. There was one who deserved all the glory, for he himself was God. There was one who remained trusting and obedient to even death on a cross. And that one is Jesus Christ. On the cross, Jesus knew the only way we could make it to that heavenly pasture was by sacrifice. His sacrifice. And Jesus, like with Moses, get this, like with Moses, Jesus pleaded for another way. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus said, Lord, take this cup from me. And God, like with Moses, said no. Moses said in verse 26, because of you, Israelites, God was angry with me and denied me from the promised land. He would not listen to me. And in the same way, because of us, God would not listen to Jesus. And that's why it says that God forsook Jesus on the cross. Jesus submitted himself in faith to the cross. He now acts as that bridge that leads us to heavenly pasture with no fear, no guilt, and no shame. By faith, we have access to heavenly promised land through Jesus by trusting and obeying in God's ability to get us there. But our old ways have to stay behind. We have to put off our old selves and put on our new selves in Christ and walk that line of faith. So I want to ask you this morning, what does your next step of faith look like? I want to share mine from over 2 years ago. This was my step of faith, and trust me, it was littered with fear. Over 2 years ago, I was sitting in a pew in church back in Texas, and one of the elders said, "Hey, we have a church plant in New Hampshire, and they've reached a part in their ministry where they could use help. They could use some help, and anyone could go." And in that moment, I felt the Holy Spirit inside of me say, "Karl, that's you. You're supposed to go." And get this, in any battle or trial that God has for you, yeah, you will be filled with excitement. Yeah, let's experience the victory. Let's answer this calling. But in that same moment, fear is going to sneak in there. And fear did. And fear said to me, "Karl, really? You? He's calling you. What could you possibly have to offer? And by yourself, you know what? Just forget it." And I respond, "You know what? You're probably right. What could I offer?" But it wouldn't hurt to ask about this. So I did. I said, if I run into an elder on the way to class, I'll ask. And as God would have it, I literally ran into an elder. And I asked, "Hey, what's this all about?" And within 2 weeks, I had met with the other elders. We made a timeline and plan on how to get me to a 2-year internship commitment to New Hampshire. And I could be there in less than 3 months. And again, excitement flowed within me. I was ready to go. And again, fear came in. Especially as it grew near to the time for me to leave, fear came in and said, "What are you thinking? Are you mental? You've never been there. You don't know anyone there. Who is this Sean Dutile guy? You don't know him. You don't know, this is a 2-year commitment. It's not a 2-week mission trip, okay? And by the way, are you actually just running from your past and your addictions and all the things that you've experienced? Or are you just running because it's just right behind you, you know? You know, the people up there might hate you. The church might reject you. And by the way, your family, your friends, your memories, your home, everything you know is here. Just forget it. And I was ready to believe that. And somehow, God helped me to take that first step of faith. And with one step, here's what God did. He gave me a job that I was unqualified for 2 weeks before I left. And that job was a full-time job. It turned into a part-time job that I could work from home so that I'd have more time for ministry. And that's never happened in the history of this company, by the way. Next, God welcomed me into a loving Dutile family who took me into their home. And then there was a destination. Trees, mountains, lakes, rivers. What more could I ask for? Yeah, there was a long winter, but it's okay. I got a good scenery. And then, through counseling, I was able to confront all of my past hurts, habits, and hang-ups and gain victory for the first time in my life. And then I made some friends. Then I made some memories. And then I thought, I want to dive into this ministry thing. I want to go back to college and get my degree in ministry. But I have no money. And then I find out that the church back in Texas says, you know what, we're going to sponsor you. Full-time, full scholarship, go for it. What? And then I met a godly woman. We started dating, and now she's on the other side of this screen. She's my wife. And now, 7 months after that 2-year internship ended, I'm the youth minister at Water's Edge. And I'm preaching to you all how fear is a liar. God is good. Excuse me. So what is your next step of faith? Let me tell you, Jesus' next step of faith, his bridge, was much more terrifying than yours. How has fear gripped you and so stolen your victory against pornography, against food addiction, against sex addiction, against self-hate, against shopping, against gossip? How has fear lied to you and kept you from victory? How has fear lied to you and so robbed you of a new life? Life free from debt, free from past pain, whether that's divorce or cheating or singleness. How has life kept you from a new life? How has fear kept you from a new life? Free from anger and resentment, free from a wrongful feeling of guilt against a sexual abuser. How has fear kept you from a new life? Free from your abandonment anxiety, free from mental illness. How has fear lied to you and so robbed you of experiencing God's wonder and glory and the secrets that he has for you that would ignite your love for him? How has fear kept you from a testimony that would display God's glory? What's your next step? Do you need to confess to a spiritual mentor of all the things in your life that you've let fear paralyze you? Is your next step to be covered with the cleansing waters of baptism and let it and the Spirit purge you from all the fear in your life that has clamped down on your heart? Or maybe it's finally time to take that first step into Celebrate Recovery and start facing your past hurts and your future fears. What is your next step in putting off your old self that keeps you stuck in that dried up pasture of sin, guilt, and shame, and kept you from putting on your new self that is found in Christ, and start living a life of faith over a life of fear? Why? Because fear is a lie. That's all I have for you today. In a moment, we're going to take time of communion. And when the music starts, come around your family and pray and remember Christ, who became that bridge for you to get to the heavenly pasture. Thank you all for listening. Let's commune together.